Personally, I think listening at first is easiest, but you can't take on too many people to follow or you'll drown. Use it as your news feed. We were just talking about, it's the best place to get your news, so start to use that as your immediate news feed of things. Follow the university professors you care the most greatly about, some of the people you respect in your own circles the most, and I think, and add and subtract people. And I would tell everyone, subtract people. Get rid of the things that aren't adding value to you, because there's so much goodness you can put in there, and then start to participate.
See, I'm worried that though, if I'm not following somebody, I'm going to be missing out on a really important
I know.
right? And we all need, we need to at least feel that we are on top of what's going on.
But I think my own boss and I were talking about that, because he goes, I can't follow 1,500 people, and so we have friends, certainly you all have acquaintances that are able to follow a bazillion people, and I'm like, are you actually following anyone then? I think it's easier to keep up with less. I can probably take on more than I have right now, but since I'm just starting to participate more actively, and I would tell everyone, look at who's following you. It will really make you behave better. Because all of a sudden you go, oh my goodness, I can't believe so-and-so is following me. And you go, well, you better consider what you're saying. And by the same token, you have to offer all this great professional stuff. We were just talking about how dull some people are, going, oh, look, I'm doing this really important thing today, and here I'm doing another important thing today. I bought a new bike yesterday. I actually tweeted that. I'm like, look, I got a great new bike, kind of thing, and put it on Facebook and said, there's some things like that make you more interesting and make you real, and it makes someone understand you that much better, so when you talk about business, they get you. So.
Todd, I'm curious to get your take on this. You're obviously might have a different perspective on how you're staying in touch with the latest technologies, both for yourself, obviously for your business as well.
Sure. For myself, I was fortunate to probably be raised a voracious early adopter of all things. I grew up in a very technology-centric household, and I haven't stopped. I just try to, the second any platform comes out, I sign up for it, at least check it out, experience it, whether it's buying the day Twitter launches it or something new or something else. I try to get on it, even if I just need to have an understanding of at least how people are using it. Who knows if it's going to spike, who knows if it isn't, in terms of as a marketer, but at least as a person, I want to know what it is and be a part of that. But I try to apply the same thing to even how I live at home too. So cut the cord on cable, use my Xbox and my Apple TV to pretty much consume just about everything. And then I think your point about mentorship though is really important, or having conversation with your peers. And so being plugged into as many experts as possible while trying to be a mass generalist, I guess, along the way. So talking with people in television about understanding what's happening with Netflix and House of Cards and how that's completely changing their model and their system for how they're making things. And as a content creator for brands, that informs then what I'm doing too. So I understand big data more. I'm trying to understand insights and analytics better every single day, and how that can inform me as a creative director and as a creative executive and what that means. And so I think for me, it really just comes down to trying to relentlessly pursue the new along the way and be open to opportunity, because you don't know where the next opportunity is going to come from. And if you make an assumption about where that's going to happen, I think that's when you start to go down a path that can be a little scary. So every new project is hopefully a new project. We try to go into it with as little preconceived notion as possible about what the work's going to look like and what form it's going to take.
So it's like creating a panel of one. You're your own research.
or panel of many all around.
Exactly. Anyone else? Amy, maybe you can talk a little bit about your own experience with this and sort of how your relationship with technology and how you're keeping tabs on it.
I think technology really is shaping the different platforms that we use in media and the way that we use them. We were just talking about, the experience that you have from an iPad to an iPad mini is different, just a behavioral one. So it's really understanding the different technologies and understanding how you use them and understanding really the thought process that goes into each one, so that you can reapply that in a really natural way, that you're not asking your consumers to go out of their way to do something, but really getting right into the flow. I think another thing with technology is not assuming that, if it didn't take off in the US, that it failed. To really look at where that technology scaled, because if you look at Google Wallet, for instance, in the US it was kind of this thing that we were like, well, this is cool, how am I going to use this? And then very few people did, but if you look at the way it impacted Africa, for instance, it was huge. So when you see these technologies, not assuming that just because they're not scaling in the U.S. that they didn't take off somewhere else and they aren't changing the way that, you know, the behavior of someone else because of it. So kind of just keeping tabs on everything and making sure to follow through with different technologies and keeping your eye on them because they can grow somewhere else.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, obviously taking that global purview so that we're not all just so focused on the U.S. Juan, did you have some thoughts along these lines? Like keeping tabs on not just what's happening here, but globally and more broadly?
Yeah, I mean, really it's, as you all know, it's hard because we were just talking down here, it's like new technology every minute, right? So to keep up with that, and as a business, how do you know, and personally, what to use, what not to use, what's good for your business, what's not good for your business? So we really take a trip to Silicon Valley, and we're just saying we have to start going to New York also, Denver, and all the other tech communities in the country. But and really meet with venture capitalists, and you know they present their portfolio. So I'll go from Bain Capital to various other ones, and they'll give a 3-hour. They'll have all their portfolio companies that they've just invested in, or things, even people they're thinking about investing in, come give a 20-minute pitch. And then, we critique each other, so to speak. So after the, 3-hour session, they'll ask me, what did you think of the technology being presented, or what did you think of the CEO? What could they do better? And then vice versa, what they get from myself and my group is, what are we thinking about? And what are the needs of the business, and how do you communicate with the customers? Then it helps them figure out which companies they're going to invest in. So we started that probably about 1.5 years ago, and I have to say, from a business perspective, it's been one of the best things that we've done to keep up with what's going on.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
I think that's a really good point, and something that we've been doing a bit more is speaking to some of the founders to understand what were the starting insights behind developing these different platforms. And that's really been really useful, because if you understand what were the insights that developed a specific new technology, then at an early stage you can start thinking from a brand perspective, how do those insights match our brands, and what's the opportunity? Of course, knowing that technology and communities can develop in any number of ways, and it might not match the original insights at first, but it does give you a lens with which to look at these things as well. And I think that in terms of how to use them, something that I found really fascinating is, to your point, jump on everything once it starts and almost see how it develops. And, I had an experience with Google Plus the other day, and somebody was like, I just heard somebody say, does anybody even use Google Plus? and I realized that the people that I follow on Google Plus, it's a very specific community and a very specific set of professions that really use Google Plus quite a lot.
Yeah, who is it?
From what I've seen, it's a lot of people that have a lot of interest in more scientific areas. It seems like every single person that works for NASA is on Google+. It's unbelievable. And spends a lot of time.
Somebody wrote something in the bathroom.
And spend a lot of time talking about, those things that don't usually seem as accessible for regular people, so to speak. So that's how I've started using all of the platforms, is really understanding what are the microcultures that start developing in each one. And why is it that they use that specific platform? So for science, it makes sense Google Plus, because they can write and explain a lot more than what they could on Twitter. Right?
Absolutely.
That's a really great point, because you're parsing out not just the device, but you're parsing out the actual the community, essentially.
And how the format helps that specific community.
I'd like to ask the marketers in the room, anybody can do it, can answer, funding the new versus funding the tried and true. So we think about maintaining this relationship with what's new, and at the same time, there are certain pressures, whether they be boss's boss, org structure, CEO, CFO, saying, okay, well, help me prove an ROI that doesn't exist yet.
Right.
So I'd be very curious to hear some of the best practices that some of you all have applied within your own organizations to get that pilot project. Always have that pilot funding program in place to make these investments too.
I'd say don't underestimate how new old technology seems to big companies. So Twitter and LinkedIn and certainly Google Plus team, brand spanking, crackling new. It's like we're unwrapping the new car in the driveway. So I think for more traditional, especially larger companies, they aren't real interested in trying to brand what is truly brand new. Except, occasionally we turn the Queen Mary in the bathtub on something that works well fast, and acceptance, is much faster. But I think it's hard for us to try I think it's hard for our IT departments to keep up, for instance, on that. They are trying to land massive systems to make the entire company go. And as our bandwidth is growing exponentially per week, trying to keep up with the corporations, like the hunger and thirst is pretty tough. So people tend to experiment by themselves, pilot it, and then bring it in, I think is kind of what tends to happen. And you always have a good entrepreneur somewhere that's going to try the good stuff. So you guys may have more adventurous organizations. But
So our organization, we hired a new CIO 6 months ago, and he started a special group of like 2 or 3 people where it's just a think tank innovation group to really, and so what's great is they're out there searching for new technology, new ways of doing things, experimenting with things, and then Neiman's was, our corporate culture has changed a lot over the past couple years, and so we really have gone out and, part of my job is to always find the new, so I always allocate a little piece of budget to try something, whether I think it'll work or it won't work. We got to keep trying new things and jumping into the space. So it's hard because everyone always asks you, what's the ROI on that? And I'm like, don't ask. Don't ask, I won't tell.
Learning, innovation.
Exactly. Innovation and learning and pushing, and so I think it's just it's a hard balance
But
in
that's
companies.
a good point. Are the metrics changing as far as like what you need to be demonstrating at organization? What's the comfort level with the CEO of the board with that kind of experimentation?
I think, personally, I think that boards and company leadership know that technology is the forefront. Big data, and dealing with customers is the new buzzword that we all talk about in here. So I think that mindsets will shift over the next couple years. I think people know they have to be into the space and they have to be testing or they're going to be left behind because innovation is happening so rapidly. That I think mindsets will change. I mean, you have to have a pioneer, you have to have someone willing to push within the company, and thank goodness we now have 2 or 3 of us on the executive team that are pushing for those
Is that the
changes.
CMO's role necessarily?
I think it's any executive team member's role, honestly, in this kind of environment of change.
So I'll add something to that. I think Jenny and Bruce and I have had the pleasure of having conversations like this one in many places with a number of people like you. What we keep hearing over and over again that's exciting is about just the incredible expansion of the CMO's power in the organization. The CMO, as I think it was Krista Crone from Xerox who said, the CMO is sort of head of human resources, chief inspiration officer. I am, and Kate and I were just talking about that. CMO is the person who's making people want to be at the company because they're responsible for crafting what is the company about, crafting the narrative around that. Obviously, IT and the work with big data, what is that more than it is a customer relationship issue or a target, who are we targeting issue, and so on, kind of down the food chain through the C-suite. So I would posit, and would love other people's reactions to it, that we are in this enormous moment of opportunity for an expansion of the CMO's role and platform, and it's arguably the second or even first newest kind of member of the C-suite and getting bigger than ever.
Carlos, I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
No, it's funny because I'm talking to CEOs and boards about what they're looking for in a CMO. I kind of characterize the role of marketing as tectonic plates shifting.
Yes.
And that's how big it is. And the interesting thing, in the driver of that has been the digital, social, and the analytics and insights. Because someone in the organization needs to figure it out for the executive suite. And it happens to fall on marketing, the role of the marketing function, because of understanding customer management, the voice of the customer, the dialogue. And the ability of a CMO to manage that dialogue, take advantage of the opportunities. And so one of the things, to your point, Eric, earlier about traditional versus net new. It's like, it's like the person in the Memorex commercial, right? The old Memorex. Some of us remember that, right? It's coming at an onslaught, right? So there's a unique opportunity the marketing has to rationalize it, but it's not just so much the what's happening out there. It's the the why and the so what. So more and more the requisite is like, I think someone does make the complex simple. And that's becoming a real competency of a marketing leader, because they can help rationalize where to make the big bets versus, let's just double down on LinkedIn, because I've seen my son use it. So.
That's an interesting point, because we were talking a little bit about the internal marketing and what we do there. I mean, it's surprising how many people in the company can't articulate the value proposition of the company, the technology company, that is.
Yes.
And one of the reasons I personally have partnered very closely with whoever is in the HR role is because at the end of the day, you're not going to win externally if you can't really turn folks inside into champions and to really understand the value of what we do, where we're going as a company. And by the way, those partnerships are often the way that you kind of break down the doors and the silos in the company, where you can form very strong groups that are part of think tanks that want to work together, and they realize that they each bring something different to the table, and the idea of a person being in one organization or another is certainly in the company that I work at is dissolving because of that. But I can't say enough about the role that a CMO has on just getting the company to be excited about its future, and I spend a lot of time on that one.
At the same time, I would urge that we have to kind of ground ourselves in reality as well, right? Because if we play this trend forward, this complexity is only going to get worse and worse, right? The rate of change is going to get faster and faster, and if we argue that the role of the CMO is expanding, and we set expectations that are counter to what reality can deliver, what happens to the role of the CMO 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now as well? And I think part of the first initial question, I think, is rooted in a lot of that in terms of we almost have to follow some of Warren Buffett's advice as well, in the sense of only invest in things that you actually use and products that you actually touch. And when we talk about experimentation, that's actually a really interesting approach as well, right? To limit yourself to only the things that you actually as a consumer enjoy or can even find or discover yourself.
Or can explain.
Yeah. Well, and Clint, maybe you can weigh in on, when you look at all this array of technology and options out there, I mean, at the end of the day, you have to make decisions as much about what you're not going to do as much as you are going to implement. So any thoughts on that, sort of what works for your business and what doesn't?
Yeah, I mean, from our particular product takes about 5 to 7 years to bring to market. It's the private jets. And so the marketing department that I head up, keeping up with new technology, exploring new frontiers. There's a lot of growth market outside the United States. U.S. is a very, very mature market for us. China, Indonesia, India in particular, to a degree South America, is emerging. So we're moving at a pace that is 100 times faster than development of the product we're going to bring to market. So what I'm doing today, I'll change probably 3 times before our newest airplane enters service. That's what we call it when after it's certified and people start taking deliveries. That creates an internal turmoil, if you will, between the internal constituents and our external constituents of the value of marketing, because they look at it as a longer term investment. Data itself, in terms of, we primarily sell to ultra high net worth individuals, which information is more readily available in the US to a degree, in Europe, China, Indonesia, India. Forget it. I mean, there are people who are worth billions and billions of dollars that probably none of us at this table even know exist. And so how do we get to these new markets potentials, first convince them that they need a private aircraft, and then capture them in a timely manner with a brand that's emerging. So we're looking for ways how to leapfrog our competition that have a more established brand in these new emerging markets. But then we have to take care of the core home market as well. So from a data perspective, with a small team, it's interesting, where do I allocate my resources more effectively for this inevitable ROI that everyone wants to hear about.
Organizationally, what's happening inside, obviously you talked about, in gaining traction among your internal employees, but just structurally and in terms of hiring and recruiting, like how are your organizations adjusting to the technology shifts that are happening in this industry as well?
I think a lot of people at the table are going to be happy to hear this, especially those of us who are under 30 on this side of the table.
You may confuse us.
Yeah. But I would actually say one of the things, it shows the need for young talent and to identify, as my CEO would call, high impact talent, because they need to be activating now. And they bring to the party some terrific skills that are different than we have. You need the great knowledge that you have in upper management on some people you have, but we have to depend on younger people to bring in, you need the freshness anyway. We're tending to use a lot more of our communications are based on our younger employees, a little bit to say that, but honestly the reverse mentoring you get from that younger generation is huge. I do think we have a whole new focus, and I think Carlos will probably be wildly aware of this with other large companies, on looking at the entire organizational structure. And you're not just planning for succession, as we all talk about, for this generation, whatever. You're looking 4 or 5 people deep. The critical path, and especially China and some place we're talking about, is developing those managers in China. So they need to be young managers right now to be able to let us grow billions of dollars into the future, kind of thing. The other thing I think that's important for all the CMOs is not only to do that link up with HR and IT and actually R&D, which I think are more obvious, is to the COO, where ROI really starts to hit home, not just CFO, where complexity reduction is the most valuable thing you can offer. And I always tell all my marketing friends, put a sign on your door that says complexity reduction officer. And I think you actually, if I think of 90% of what I do is trying to bring down the complexity. And I think younger employees, by nature of their animal, go that way. And I think you have a natural, and I think technology, if you use it correctly, should be stripping out the complexity, not adding it. So
Simple message. Simple
but you buy some great friends
Powerful.
for that, as opposed to adding it, or being an expense. Chief Marketing Officer I used to be 7 pennies walking right down the hallway. It would be right now. So I think it gives you value in your position value.
Brendan, what do you think on that? I mean, from your perspective, how do you interpret or how do you hear how corporations are viewing your sort of age cohort?
Yeah, no, I think it's awesome. It's interesting, kind of going back to like the first question too. I think in general in recruiting people and also kind of cultivating like that network of people where you can learn. I think there's one of the best things that works is almost like giving away a lot of your secrets and your insights, and like with social media being what it is, you kind of tend to then pull in a lot of the other smart people that are on the same wavelength, and it's interesting, like particularly within social media marketing and advertising, it's like there are a lot of nuances, and I think there's like a lot of people that kind of talk about the space, but I think when you get down to execution, there's a much smaller niche that can like execute. And it's difficult to find those people, and almost like if you give away like, hey, this is how we executed something, and just give it out for free, not only does it force you to get better because other people now know it, but it also attracts the other people who are like interested in that space. And I know for me personally, it's been a great way to build like a network of people that I trust, and we all kind of pass our ideas to each other, and it forces everybody to get better and attracts new people.
That's such an extraordinary point of kind of mentoring up, because I think if you're not in the under 30 generation or even under 35 generation, you don't naturally think it's good business for your company to give away your expertise. And I think that's a fabulous point of getting one generation to think differently about how to transact.
And I think the only other thing to add to giving and recruiting the 30 under 30 sort of generation is, they have to have the ability and the power to actually mess up, right?
Totally.
Especially,
I should do that too,
especially within the marketing context, right? If you think about how many blunders have occurred from massive organizations, from even purely simple as tweeting the wrong thing, and the effects of that.
Absolutely. The tweet heard around the world.
To create those managers, right, of the future, kind of have to let them mess up.
Well, is there still that really great distinction between fear of failure is so much lower among your generation than, Are you butting heads with that?
Definitely, but I think it has to be. It can be something that can be conditioned, right? You know, it depends on how you respond to that failure, right? As a CMO or as a marketing leader, you know, if it's an organization that's cultured around "don't make that again" or you're going to be fired,
right?
Then you're not going to get the innovation that you're trying to, probably, right? So it's an interesting conundrum, and I think it's also the evolution of the organization in general, right? To be more flexible in a world that is becoming more flexible.
I love this discussion just around like the notion of mentorship, but not just mentor up, but it's really just about like collaboration at the end of the day, what collaboration means. I think I'm really fortunate to work at CA because we're very flat structure. I mean, everyone's an agent, so to speak, right? And that means we can all hop into each other's office and talk about ideas and mentor each other's ideas and craft those ideas along the way, whether that's a talent transaction or a marketing idea or what that is or what that becomes. And it's kind of powerful. And you add that, the notion of where you hire talent from and how you find high impact talent. I mean, I don't think I would have ever assumed that, you know, one of my fellow creatives who I work so much with comes to us from Pixar and worked on Brave and does story narrative. And now we're applying that skill in developing story narrative from a very almost art and science balance to how we're developing brand narrative and how that develops along the way. And I learned so much on a daily basis from that. It's incredible. So it's always about trying to find new places and new people that are going to complement you in a meaningful way. It's cool.
That's great.
It's interesting because I think the conversation has turned more towards innovation. And how do you foster innovation within organizations, which is kind of a whole different topic and a challenge for most large organizations. You know, for Clayton Christensen's work around the innovator's dilemma, and collaboration is often the key to that, because you sort of close off the thing that would be most successful because culturally it doesn't fit in with what's been done before, and it's very hard to replicate.
So the concept that's going through my head right now is ownership of the idea. So Chris, maybe you can kind of weigh in on that. Like, where does that fall then in this hyper-collaborative environment that we're talking about?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting. You know, I'll give a very simple example. I think there's a D&AD, which is a big award show in London, and I was judging it, and I was judging what they named the integrated approach, which, as you guys know, is basically collaboration of endless amount of partners to create one piece or one platform. The interesting thing is that all the winners were Americans.
That is interesting.
Not one was European. And it has nothing to do that you don't have smart people or great people. Basically, they haven't opened up the box of being a genius. So there's people do fantastic work, but they don't share it. When they still think that by owning the purity, they will evolve. And in a world where you have to open, you have to share. And I think another thing that happens, to your point, and Carlos, what you said, is most clients that we have that we consider innovators, that's because the culture is about that.
Yes. Totally.
And the ones that fail is because they feel forced. And someone came to the room and said, I'm sick of this, someone needs to innovate. And we go, okay, fine, let's find some young people come in and do some crazy shit, you know? But I mean, that's not the solution. The solution is the culture of this company is innovation. Therefore, we create a culture, a safe haven for creative people to do something new. And to the point that you mentioned before, Carlos, and it's something we have discovered as well, is usually companies and the brands, they have a why, not only how and a what, are the ones that move faster. So when they become usually talent magnets. Think about companies today, they have a clear why in your mind. And usually it's because they have a great story. And once you have that, you have a talent magnet.
So then what's the intersection there, you know, just to follow on our focus on this emerging technology, then what's the intersection of what you're talking about, which transcends just the technology, you know what I mean?
Yes. I think what you create, and to your point about simplification, which is the key of all this, because you can get basically drunk about all these companies that are basically showing up, and you try to be cool and catching up, because you read it here and you just get crazy. So you have to create your own curation center. You have to create something that is basically a filter. And this is interesting to me because this is the why I'm building. And not, this is interesting because someone told me there's something I have to adapt, which is a completely failure. So I think as long as your culture is based on the why and the why becomes a filter, to anything moves around you, you eventually create something very interesting for you. And if you don't have it, collaborate. You know, and if you have an open-ended architecture, you can get there. In advertising, as a communication business, no one wants to name it advertising anymore, but it feels like a sin. Feels like a sin, right? In the communication business, which I actually rather talk about the idea business, which I think people forget that what we do is about ideas. That only can happen if you collaborate. And I think the old times where someone told you you have to have a 360 approach, and you say 360, excuse me. Still, people think you have the 360 approach, which basically thinks I impact you with adapted messages so that everything looks like wallpaper and it looks great. When you have to say, no, I need 80.5% of all that, and then you have to have an open structure. Then you can bring people in and make something more relevant. In our case, we always say that has to do with human relevance, you know, because at the end of the day we talk about technology, but this is about human relevance. And so if that filter works for that, I think you see any great companies around the table will find their secret for innovation. Which, by the way, just end with that one. Yesterday I was sitting with some very smart people and downtown, and they start to destroy their work innovation because they basically said, we don't innovate, we create, therefore we are inventors. And I think that is quite an interesting approach. That when we say innovation is built on something that exists, we bring something in that doesn't exist. And I think that's something that we could put on the table to stop using the word innovation and create something that doesn't exist. In each of your businesses, you create something unique and something magical that someone came up to create your company. That needs to be explored and nurtured, which I think is a very inspiring thought.
Yeah.
Well, we promised to keep it till 2:30, but I was going to say, are there any last thoughts? That was a great way to end, but anyone else want to add just any last thoughts about this topic of technology?
Can I just say, I think that, you know, this concept of having that rich story and really identifying what that is. I mean, everything that we're talking about, be it from the ever-expanding world of the CMO, the point of the exciting thing about the CMO is changing what brands are, right? And moving beyond brands being a facade to being something of substance. And if you move to that level, then it is about destroying silos. It is about new product development. It is about the people that work for you and the relationship that they have to consume as a whole, right? And then the role of emerging technology in that sense, they're tools that can help you tell the story a bit better.
Yeah.
So that's why we keep going back to stories and these things, because that's what sits at the heart of it.
Yeah, totally.
And technology is the tool to tell that story.
Right.
Yeah. I'd also add that the stories are best told by customers, and we can be their voice and help other people understand the value that's uniquely theirs, and then bringing that to the forefront as the story.
Well, and you can make things that people value now because of these tools in a way that you couldn't before, be it a content they want to consume or an experience they want to be part of, be that entertainment or utility or somewhere in between. And along the way, you can also tell your brand story when doing it. And it's how all these things work together. Like that technology has given us that opportunity in a way that it hasn't before. No longer being the disruption, instead creating things people care about. And that's pretty exciting.
People love brands because they love the story behind it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think not because what they only do, you know.
And of course, and we could analyze each one of them. But for me, one of the exciting things about social is its ability to break down walls, you know, so that people finally understand why is it that our company does what it does, and why are we so passionate about doing that? And is that just something that one person's deciding upon, or everybody else is believing in this? And those things are very powerful for other people to believe that there is some substance behind the advertising. And I think that advertising has become a taboo in many ways, and saying advertising simply because it's become a facade. And that's what people think it is. It's just a facade and not substance.
Well, I don't know about that, though. I think advertising, to that degree, advertising I've always looked at as an invitation. So the degree to which you write a good invitation is you have an opportunity to either invite someone in, and they can either choose to respond or not. So I think there certainly is a certain point for advertising. But in just a story about brands, probably one that, or a very real one. So my grandmother, 92 years old, lives in San Diego, can't go out as much as she did, as she used to. She just doesn't drive anymore. She lives in a community home. She buys clothing for my children, her great grandchildren, through Neiman Marcus online. But here's the story. But she does it now online because she's maintained that identity. When she used to be able to shop in the store, now she can't. So what does she do? She transfers her. She uses her my mother-in-law's brother, who lives close, to help her, to aid her in that journey, right? So you have this very real example of collaborators, right? She has a younger generation helping her, such that she can then maintain that connection to the brand, but then also make it an experience that my children value. So I do think that what is that, right? Is that an emotional experience that she has with that she's had for years, for decades? With Neiman Marcus, and it's an experience that goes across generations, and also one where technology is applied in an uncommon way. I don't think you necessarily think, okay, what is my 90-plus segment profile?
My mom's in it. I can't believe it.
Have you?
More and more you will.
Yeah, well, as they seem to grow, but it's a very real moment where brands transcend generations.
Yeah. What you're talking about is quality too. It's just part of it, like advertising as the invitation, or whether it's just at the end of the day, like the one thing that's absent for this conversation is like, great story, great creative, great experiences. The quality of them, they matter. They matter now more than ever because we are closer to the product than ever. We're closer to the brand than ever, and so right away whether there's an authenticity or not. And so you have to really work hard and question yourself to make sure that there is a quality there.
Well, there's that phrase, what is it, nothing kills a bad product faster than great advertising.
Listen, thank you all so much for being here. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.